The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Oh man, Lewis, I am fired up. We have a hell of a show today, and I know that there is going to be a portion of our audience that is not going to like me after today's show. But you know what? I know that there is a portion of our audience that is going to appreciate that I am not doing things or not doing things for optics on the program, and I am telling it to you like I see it and like I think it's important for progressives to know. What am I talking about? Well, last week I talked to you about a whole bunch of people emailing me saying, David, are you voting for Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate? Because if you supported Bernie, the obvious correct thing is obviously to support Jill Stein. And I explained, no, I'm not. Jill Stein is fundamentally anti-science on a number of issues, including GMO. She is irrationally anti-Israeli in a way that I could never, ever get behind, because no sensible, rational person could ever come to the conclusion she has come to on that issue. And it's gotten way, way worse. Really, really bad. A video was sent to me of Jill Stein saying that Wi-Fi could be dangerous for our brains. And I'm going to play the clip for you. It's actually not clear from the clip that she knows the difference between Wi-Fi and wireless phones. It is just an utter mess, okay? First, Jill Stein says, and I'll play it for you, that education should move away from screens, that we should not have kids on screens in school, which we could talk about screen usage, but if you want students to be ready for college and the real world, you need a reasonable amount of computer work to be going on. We'll listen to that, and then we'll get to the Wi-Fi part. And this is just flat out anti-science stuff, the stuff of conspiracy websites. Okay, take a look.
Wonderful. Health issues, social issues, you name it. But to be staring at screens, we already know that kids who get put in front of TVs, instead of interacting, this is not good in all kinds of ways, and is just, it's not good for their cognitive development, it's not good for their social development. That is incredible that kids in kindergarten, we should be moving away from screens at all levels of education, not moving into them.
Yeah.
And this is another corporate ruse. This is another gimmick to try to make a buck, make big bucks, in fact, and education and teachers and communities suffer. So we need to stand up to that. Thank you.
What about the wireless?
Yes, right. We should not be subjecting kids' brains especially to that. And, we don't follow that issue in this country, but in Europe where they do, they have good precautions around wireless. Maybe not good enough, because it's very hard to study this stuff. We make guinea pigs out of whole populations, and then we discover how many die. And this is like the paradigm for how public health works in this country, and it's outrageous. This is why we need to take back really not just our schools, and our electoral system. We really need to take back the whole institution of how we create.
This is woo. Okay, this is not a thinking progressive, and it's not even clear she knows what she's talking about. The question seems to be about Wi-Fi, and there are completely unsubstantiated claims that Wi-Fi could cause cancer, that the radiation is bad for brains, etc. We know about wireless phones, and I don't know if the critique here, because I don't understand exactly, is the critique that she's saying there is something to Wi-Fi and brains, or is she just not understanding the difference between Wi-Fi and mobile phones? I don't know, but it is a non-science mess. Wi-Fi has been studied. There is no reasonable evidence at all that it poses any risk to health. And the articles keep getting posted, and you might read headlines on YouTube about Wi-Fi and health, but there is no good science saying Wi-Fi is bad for people. It has been studied, and it comes down, Lewis, to understanding types of radiation, not worth getting into now. But this is non-science mumbo jumbo. There is nothing to this.
Yeah, it's the getting away from screens thing that kind of irritates me as well. It's but it's easy to fall into that trap. She's in that camp. It's easy to do a cursory internet search of Jill Stein and say, oh yeah, she seems pretty level-headed and I like what she stands for. But there are some serious concerns here.
There's also been serious debate about Jill Stein's position on vaccines, and the debate has been because she's previously taken a pretty nebulous stance about it. The Washington Post finally got Jill Stein to be more direct about her stance on vaccines, and it is disturbing. She started off fine talking about the importance of vaccines. I'll put up the first quote for you here, where she says, I think there's no question vaccines have been critical in ridding us of the scourge of many diseases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The problem, though, is that people do not trust the Food and Drug Administration or even CDC, for that matter, where corporate and pharmaceutical influence, where corporate influence and the pharmaceutical industry have a lot of influence. Okay, fair enough. And then here's where it goes completely non-science, woo, mumbo jumbo, where she continues and says, as a medical doctor, and now this is really low, because her experience as a medical doctor has no bearing on any of what she's talking about with regard to vaccines. But she says, as a medical doctor, there was a time where I looked very closely at those issues, and not all those issues were completely resolved. There were concerns among physicians about what the vaccination schedule meant. The toxic substances like mercury, which used to be rampant in vaccines, there were real questions that needed to be addressed. I think some of them at least have been addressed. I don't know if all of them have been addressed. And you might say, well, no big deal. She's sort of dancing around the whole mercury toxicity vaccine schedule thing. She's using her title of doctor to appear to be particularly qualified to comment about vaccines when she's not. The mercury thing has been totally debunked. And if you're going to email me, and I know some of you will, and say, well, David, Snopes said Jill Stein is right on vaccines. Number one, no one source is ever always right. So yes, Snopes wrote an article defending Jill Stein, but 4 or 5 other reputable skeptic pro-science blogs have said, well, listen, both Jill Stein and Snopes are wrong on this. So, Lewis, this is not someone that I would ever support. And I have disagreements with Hillary Clinton on specific elements of foreign policy, or I would rather the minimum wage be $15 rather than $12 or whatever. But this is just fundamentally anti-science nonsense. And I'll mention also the Green Party supports funding homeopathy, which has been debunked as not a valid treatment or cure for any condition or symptom, period. Homeopathy is nothing. And the Green Party, not necessarily Jill Stein, but the Green Party supports funding that. I don't want anything to do with this.
No, the party should really be focusing more on they should sound like Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
They really need to get away from this stuff. And, it's just as easy to do a cursory search of Hillary Clinton and think that everything's wonderful. And then you add to this the reality that Jill Stein cannot and will not be the president. Just add that into your equation. I know it's great to have other parties, but just consider that.
We also need to add into the equation when we talk about Jill Stein that she has chosen a running mate for vice president who is a total extremist. If you regularly watch or listen to this show, you know this is not a show where I will cheerlead anything that has a supposedly progressive stamp on it. If you want a show like that, there are many shows like that. Okay, I don't even need to name them for you. You can find those. I am going to be completely upfront that when there is a critique I need to make of something that is supposedly progressive, I will make it. And Jill Stein has chosen Ajamu Baraka as her running mate for the presidency on the Green Party ticket. We've already talked about Jill Stein's anti-science views, the Green Party's pro-homeopathy views. Okay, fine. What about Ajamu Baraka? Well, he's written that President Obama and other members of the black petite bourgeoisie are merely puppets, living proof that the white supremacist machine has hijacked the minds of black people. Okay. Also wrote an article on his blog titled Paris Attacks and the White Lives Matter Movement, where he argues that France, Belgium, and other nations that have been affected by terrorism effectively got what they deserved, saying while the victims of the violence in Paris may have been innocent, France was not, he wrote, because the crimes committed against Arabs, Muslims, and Africans and the horrors of colonialism and the concerted effort by the French and U.S. authorities to fund extremist groups in the Middle East are to blame for the woes of Western societies. According to Baraka, the Sanders campaign didn't offer a genuine program for radical change. I mean, we're talking about free education, government-provided health care. That apparently was not radical enough because it was tacitly committed to Eurocentrism and, as he says, the Bernie Sanders campaign normalized white supremacy. He's written on his blog that Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad isn't a bad guy, who was, after all, reelected by big margins, and that he is not engaged in any war crimes against his people, demonstrably untrue. He went on Kevin Barrett's Truth Jihad podcast, which is basically a 9/11 truther podcast, and said that some recent airline crashes were false flags, that the Democratic Party is white supremacist, and he is also saying that the U.S. is intentionally supporting ISIS. Now, we've talked about how weapons get to groups that the U.S. claims to oppose, but to flat out say the U.S. is flat out supporting ISIS is a bit further than most rational, clear thinkers are willing to go. If this is the liberal hero of the supposedly miraculous Green Party, Lewis, I want nothing to do with it. This is an extremist.
You would never think that he would be part of the Green Party in any way.
Right.
If you just, read what he was about. Unbelievable. Maybe he was just picked because Jill Stein knows she's not going to win, but this is someone who maybe could get her more votes that she might not otherwise have.
Okay.
Who does this guy really appeal to? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Anybody who truly analyzes what this individual has written and said and identifies as a progressive, there's a fundamental clash there. I don't know how you could say, I am a true progressive, and after reading what Ajamu Baraka has read and said over time, that's who I want to support. I don't get it. So you all know I voted for Bernie Sanders, and you all know very clearly that I am not supporting the Stein Baraka ticket in November. Bring on the hate. Tell me where I am wrong. We will take a break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Denis Ivanchenkov. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I could think of no better day to be member of the day for Denis than today, because the all-new David Pakman Show website has launched. It is extraordinary. davidpakman.com continues to be the URL. Lewis, the website, it looks great. It works so much better. The membership system is so much more robust. Everything about this website is orders of magnitude better than what we had.
To say it's the best thing ever created in the history of mankind would
be a huge understatement.
Would certainly not be hyperbole.
No, by no means. And because we want people testing the new membership system and also the new coupon system, I have set up a coupon code. The coupon code is BETA50, BETA50, okay? It is a 50% discount for the life of your membership, okay? For as long as you keep your membership, it is a 50% discount. It can be off of a monthly membership or a yearly membership, your choice. The discount code will only work for the first 25 people, okay? And one of the great things about the system is when we used to run these specials, Lewis, people had to email me when I had a limited number of discounted memberships, and then I had to keep track of how many I had. No more, Lewis. We are in the 21st century. And after 25 uses of this coupon, it will no longer work. So if it sounds interesting to you to have a 50% discounted membership, help us test the new system, use the coupon code BETA50 at davidpakman.com/membership. And by the way, the coupon code expires altogether on Thursday, August 11th. So take advantage of that soon. Very, very exciting. Let me also remind you, if you ever use Amazon.com to buy stuff on the internet, the shopping you do can support the work we do. All you have to do is go to davidpakman.com/Amazon before shopping, and then anything you buy will send us a little kickback. Lewis, Rogaine men's hair regrowth foam was purchased over the weekend. I recently had a conversation with a couple of people I know who are starting to lose their hair. And some of them are very scared of using some of these treatments because of the side effects. As you know, my little brother started losing his hair pretty early on, had a consultation with a dermatologist who provided some of these options, and he decided the side effects were not worth it for him.
What are a few of them?
Well, I don't know if we want to get into that, but I think impotence is one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know. I am more worried about losing my hair than it going gray, because if you really don't like gray hair, there's a pretty simple fix to that. The baldness solutions seem to be a little more complex and invasive if you want to go with like a transplant or whatever else.
Yeah, those do seem to work, but certainly not a pleasant experience. And there's going to be a period of time where your head might look pretty ridiculous because of how that works. But some people do say that this stuff works.
Absolutely. If you have had success with these, I would be interested in hearing from our audience, people who have used them. And we have a lot of friends, Lewis, who are starting to see those hairlines receding, and they're starting to think about what will their plan be going forward. Also, a lot of people purchasing through our Amazon link, Rich Hill, which was my documentary from last week, as well as Walkable City, which was the book by a guest we interviewed last week. So thanks to everybody who continues to use that link, davidpakman.com/Amazon. Lewis, we have to continue now with the program that many people may not like, okay? You know that I don't do things on this show for optics. I do things for what I believe is the truth. I think you know that, right, Lewis? You've been around on the show.
I'm aware of this.
You know that I support the broader goals of Black Lives Matter, wanting real racial justice in the U.S., wanting to look at disproportionate and unfair prosecution and incarceration of Black Americans. But you also know that I will call things out when they aren't quite right. This includes me calling out protest tactics that were counterproductive to the Black Lives Matter cause. This includes looking more deeply at broad statements like Black people are more likely to be shot by police and seeing what the data really tell us. I've been slammed for this. I've been called a white supremacist for this. But I'm not going to, as a result of that, do 100% gushing commentary about any particular group when there are critiques to make. Now, I'm going to get slammed today, too, and I'm ready for it. Black Lives Matter put out a letter, a platform, effectively, and it includes support of the Israeli BDS movement. This is a platform which, in addition to calling for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions of Israel, it called Israel an apartheid state. It says that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians, and it said that the fight of Black Lives Matter for Black American equality in the U.S. is the same as the fight for Palestinian rights. I've told you before that Black Lives Matter was hinting at drawing parallels between their battle and what they see as the situation in Israel. And I've told you it makes no sense empirically, nor from an optics point of view, to be perfectly honest. They have jumped full speed ahead. Now, I know that when you hear support BDS, end colonialism, end the genocide, stop the apartheid, it sounds like a lot. Wow, that's a really overpowering case. What if we break it down into its component parts? Well, you quickly see that it makes absolutely no sense. Let's start with apartheid, right? Black Lives Matter's platform, for whatever reason they've decided, it points out that Israel is an apartheid state. Now, of course, apartheid, we know, Lewis, is a policy of segregating and both economically and politically oppressing groups of people based on race or ethnicity. Typically, historically, it is done against the non-white population. South Africa is a common example of this. This is factually untrue when it comes to its existence in Israel. Israeli citizens have the same rights regardless of their ethnicity, religion, or race, period. Now, people will hear me and they'll say, David, what about what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank? The people there have different rules, so it is apartheid. There is no doubt that Palestinian movement between Gaza and the West Bank and what I guess we would call sovereign Israel is heavily regulated. But those territories are governed by the elected Palestinian Authority and Hamas leaders. There is no comparison to a state of apartheid like the one in South Africa that is typically referred to. It is a total lack of credibility to say, oh, Israel's an apartheid state. You know very little if that's what you think.
Yes, you just don't know what apartheid means. Israel has had Palestinian elected officials. So please tell me how that's apartheid, please.
Next, genocide. Oh, there's genocide against the Palestinians. The new Black Lives Matter platform claims there's genocide against the Palestinians. This is also ridiculous. Any reasonable assessment would deduce that there is no such thing as genocide against Palestinians by Israel. Genocide, of course, the deliberate killing of a large group of people, especially those of a particular ethnic group or nation. Actual genocides are like what the Nazis did to the Jews, what the Turks did to the Armenians, what the Hutus did to the Tutsis in Rwanda. There have been horrible and tragic deaths in Gaza and the West Bank that have resulted from an unfortunate security state, which I have been very critical of and have suggested ways to loosen. The war in Gaza has resulted in deaths. It is not genocide. We can find individual terrible acts by individuals in Israel, like in most countries where you have militaries involved in conflict, but it is not genocide. The Palestinian populations in the West Bank and Gaza have exploded during the supposed genocide, consistently and significantly, dating back to 1948. In most genocides, the population of the afflicted group is negatively impacted by that genocide. It doesn't increase explosively. During the Holocaust, 78% of Jews in Europe were killed. The Khmer Rouge killed 25% of its own people. In Iraq, 90% of Kurdish villages were once destroyed, on and on and on. A couple of years ago, the Palestinian population was over 4 million. Data tells us the Palestinian population is growing faster than that of sovereign Israel, or the non-Gaza and West Bank areas of Israel, call it what you will. By the year 2035, according to the UN, the Palestinian population is expected to increase by 60% compared to 40% in Israel. That is not a genocide, Louis.
No, just more people who don't know what genocide really means. And if they are passionate about genocide, sure, they can't do anything about things that happened 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. But in Sudan, there's still basically a genocide happening. And this is where the native black people are being slaughtered. Everyone's Muslim here by those who have come in and taken power and the government in Khartoum. And shouldn't those who are speaking about genocide and apartheid when it comes to Israel and the BLM movement, shouldn't they be upset about that? I don't get it.
I will talk about that in a second. Last thought on the genocide thing. Some people will hear me say this. Well, the population has exploded. And they will say, well, David, Israel wants to commit genocide, but they've tried, but they haven't killed as many people as they wanted to kill. Those are the same people who talk about the overwhelming and disproportionate firepower and weaponry that Israel has. You're saying with all of that weaponry, they have been unable to kill more Palestinians, and that has accidentally led to this population explosion. Come on. Lastly, BDS, as Lewis is talking about. BDS is, Black Lives Matter says that BDS is a movement which shares their goals of an end to the war against black people. Number one, most black people in Israel are not in Gaza or the West Bank, but in Israel proper. If you ask them, would you rather be here or in Gaza or the West Bank? Figure out what they say. You will be very interested at the results of what they will tell you. And number two, to Lewis's point, I've talked about BDS. People say, David, why is BDS inherently anti-Semitic? Well, it's not. BDS is not inherently anti-Semitic. I've said it many times, but it has become a safe haven for many anti-Semites. And if BDS said, hey, we are a movement that seeks to use boycott and divestment to call for change in countries whose policies we don't like or are oppressive to groups of people or whatever, and we're going to apply that tactic everywhere that we see these problems, that would be one thing. But no, that's not how BDS works.
It's just Israel.
BDS has said, we want change in Israel to the extent they believe is warranted, and we could debate that. What technique can we come up with to try to hurt Israel specifically? And that is what Lewis is getting to. And when we talk about the principles of humanitarianism and human rights, one of those principles is the worst first. And there is no basis under which one could argue, if we are just to look at the world and say, let's apply BDS tactics to the worst first, that you would have a group that is solely focused on Israel. Absolutely undeniable. There is no question about this. I think this is terrible for optics. People forget that actually many African American activists and thinkers were on the side of what is colloquially used to be called Zionism, which now is like a bad word. It used to mean just a place where Jews can be safe and not get kicked out of, right? Edward Wilmot Blyden, founder of the 19th century American Pan-African movement, said, I have the deepest possible interest in the current history of the Jews, especially in the marvelous movement called Zionism. W.E.B. Du Bois, founder of the NAACP, said in 1919, the African movement must mean to us what the Zionist movement means to the Jews. Marcus Garvey, the founder of the Back to Africa movement, said in 1920, when a Jew says we shall have Palestine, and of course that term is being used because at the time, the British Mandate of Palestine, we're not talking about the same Palestine as Gaza and West Bank today. When a Jew says we shall have Palestine, the same feeling comes to us as when we say we shall have Africa. And even Malcolm X declared the year before he was assassinated that Pan-Africanism will do for the people of African descent all over the world the same that Zionism has done for the Jews all over the world. Now, to be clear, I'm not using the sort of caricature definition of Zionism, of settlements and right-wing governments like Benjamin Netanyahu, I am unequivocally opposed to those. I am saying Zionism in the form from the 1920s that is being used here, there should be something like Israel that exists. So to pretend that there is this natural connection between Black Lives Matter and anti-Israeli movements like BDS that have cropped up is absolutely ridiculous. Now, if this is a battle that Black Lives Matter wants to pick, have at it. It will be hugely destructive and a distraction to their movement, which, again, the original principles of, you can find no bigger supporter of than me.
But it's also going to be harmful in other ways. It's not just going to harm the movement. They probably see this as some type of outreach thing. We're going to bring in people from BDS. People from BDS are going to accept and adopt the BLM movement. But for those who don't really have a firm understanding of what's happening over there, all of a sudden now people in BLM, like in BDS, start throwing around words like apartheid and genocide. And
Absolutely.
And all of a sudden you have a very devoted, very anti-Israeli new recruit.
It escalates the fact-free insanity. And, you know, I know people will be mad because I shouldn't, according to some, I shouldn't even be commenting about this because I don't have the right characteristics, because I look white and, you know, whatever else, whatever rules exist for me not being able to comment on this or at least be credible. Tell me specifically on the facts where you disagree, rather than just, I don't have a right to speak on this issue because of my perceived identity. That's what I'm interested in. This is bad for the BLM movement, whose broader goals I agree with and want to see succeed. Quick story about George Zimmerman. Initially, after George Zimmerman was acquitted in the killing of Trayvon Martin, there were a number of run-ins with police. Police were called because of alleged domestic violence against his girlfriend, whole bunch of different police interactions. And then things got very, very quiet until now. George Zimmerman was apparently punched in the face at a Sanford, Florida restaurant over the weekend. And witnesses say he was bragging about having killed Trayvon Martin. Channel 9 obtained the 911 call that was made, and we will put the transcript up on the screen for you. The 911 dispatcher saying, "Who started the argument?" Zimmerman saying, "He recognized me. He told me he was going to kill me. He told me he'd expletive shoot me, and he punched me in the face. This man just punched me in the face." The dispatcher saying, "Is he still there?" Zimmerman saying, "Yep, he said he's going to kill me. You need to send like 3 or 4 cops." Zimmerman later claimed that he was explaining to people sitting at the table that he had shot Trayvon Martin in self-defense when a large man approached and said, "You're bragging about that," before reportedly punching George Zimmerman in the face. Now, in this little incident, Zimmerman is considered the victim, but when witnesses were spoken to by authorities, they said, no, Zimmerman just came over and started bragging about killing the unarmed teen. They overheard Zimmerman reportedly say to some other person, "I love your tattoos. My name is George Zimmerman, you know, the guy who killed Trayvon Martin." And witnesses say he then proceeded to show his ID. This is weird, Louis. You have some tattoos. Have you ever provided ID when you show people your tattoos or explain them to people?
This is, he thinks he's a celebrity.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, he sort of is, an infamous one, I suppose. But this isn't the first time we've heard that he brags about this regularly. I mean, it's his claim to fame.
I'm starting to suspect that George Zimmerman is not a great guy.
Just now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It only took him killing an unarmed teenager in a confrontation he created, calling President Obama a baboon publicly, retweeting image of Trayvon Martin's corpse, posting nude pictures of his ex-girlfriend without her consent on the internet, publicly declaring that his ex-girlfriend is a whore for effing a, quote, dirty Muslim on social media, partnering with a Muslim-free gun shop to sell Confederate flag prints that he made, getting arrested for pointing a shotgun at his girlfriend, and then again for throwing a wine bottle at his girlfriend, allegedly, and then arrested for battery of an officer after the officer tried to arrest an underage kid that Zimmerman brought into a bar years and years ago. Maybe these stories are all just wrong.
Maybe you've got the wrong idea, and this is just the media painting a bad picture of a really great guy.
I maintain we have not heard the last of George Zimmerman. Let's take a break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Terry Kogan, who's professor of law at the S.J. Quinney College of Law at the University of Utah. This topic of bathrooms has really come to the forefront of national media, mostly through discussions of so-called transgender bathroom bills. And one of the arguments that we often hear from those who are against laws that allow individuals to use, or rather, those who want individuals to be forced to use the bathroom that matches their birth genitals, often argue that it's completely natural, obvious, and has been the way things are done forever, that bathrooms in public are segregated by genitals. That's not actually true, is it?
That's absolutely not true, though you're right that most people hold that intuition that it makes perfect sense that because there are two different sexes and because people need privacy, that it's the natural way to separate public restrooms. In fact, that is not how the first laws in the United States came about.
So talk to us, for people who don't know the backstory, when did sex-segregated public restrooms come about? And people may have no idea that this really does connect to the Industrial Revolution in great part.
Absolutely. So the first laws in the United States that required sex-segregated restrooms were adopted at the end of the 19th century, and they applied to factories and other workplaces. The first law was in Massachusetts in 1887. New York adopted a similar law the next year, and by 1920, over 40 states had adopted laws requiring that factory restrooms be separated by sex. And I was interested now several years ago in what led to these laws being adopted. And what I discovered is that the origin of these laws actually dates back to the beginning of the 19th century and the so-called separate spheres ideology. And here's what that's all about. Until the end of the 18th century, the economy of the United States ran largely out of the home. Men and women would not only raise their families in the home, but through trades and crafts create goods that would then be sold out of the home. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, manufacturing became centralized in factories in the United States. And what started happening was that men left the home to work in these factories, whereas women stayed in the home to take care of their families. And there arose, as I suggested, a vision called the separate spheres ideology, which suggested that the proper sphere for men was in the public realm, in factories, as political leaders, and the proper sphere for women was in the home, watching the hearth fires and raising their kids. This ideology was broadly accepted culturally in the United States beginning in the early 19th century. The problem was that shortly after the beginning of the century, women began leaving the home to work in factories. In 1822, when the textile factories, for example, in Lowell, Massachusetts, were up and running, a large number of the operatives in those factories were women. So there is this cultural ideology that women should stay at home, and the reality of the evolving 19th century is that women are leaving the home in droves, and you end up with the following situation. Every time a woman left the home to enter the public realm, it created a kind of social, cultural anxiety. And in response to that, there were two reactions by the mid-19th century. The first reaction was that states began adopting protective labor legislation that applied to women and children, legislation that limited the number of hours that women could work, legislation that limited certain dangerous jobs only to men, Women were forbidden from those jobs. But in addition to this legislation, a very interesting architectural response began happening in the United States, where there were separate spaces, architectural spaces in buildings created for women. So, for example, in public libraries, early in the 19th century, women weren't allowed in public libraries. But once they were allowed in such libraries, beginning in the 1840s, you discover that separate women's reading rooms were created. You discovered that in hotels, in photography studios, that would be separate, in department stores, separate salons for women. And the idea was women are inherently vulnerable when they enter the public realm, and therefore they need a protected space when they enter the public realm.
So Terry, if I may, it sounds like what you're sort of saying is, as we often hear from social conservatives in other areas, what they want to present as sort of the way things have been for as far back as we can figure it out in human society was actually something sort of acutely established sometime as far back as the 19th century, as you're saying, or sometimes as recently as the 1950s, but at some point in the last several hundred years.
The 1850s.
1850s. I'm sorry. Yes, I might have. Well, no.
Right,
sometimes it seems like the conservatives want to go to the 1950s specifically. So that would be sort of not with this particular issue, but I was sort of setting the range.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. That's right. That there is a sense that the establishment of a custom, as you suggested earlier, was simply natural, the way things should be, and laws simply reflect that natural state of things, and my research has shown that that's just wrong. So just to finish the story, by the 1880s, this notion of creating exclusive spaces for women in public began being applied to the factory. And the factories in the late 19th century were dangerous places. There is no doubt about that. Moreover, given the rise of the Victorian era, men and women would work next to each other in factories on assembly lines, which caused great concern. So the solution to protect women in factories was to create a kind of home-like haven in the public realm in the guise of a separate public restroom. There were also laws that required separate dressing rooms, and there were laws that required resting rooms for women, all aimed at protecting women in this dangerous public realm.
What do we know if we go further back, and this goes beyond the United States, but maybe going back to Europe, in terms of bathroom spaces or bathroom-like spaces, of course, predating modern plumbing or anything like it? What do we know about the organization of these spaces with regard to gender?
Okay, so realistically, the possibility of a multi-user bathroom did not come about until the technology of public works, of sewer systems, allowed there to be indoor plumbing where the effluence was taken away from buildings through sewers.
Right.
And that did not come about. The first well-known public bathrooms were at the Great Exhibition in London in 1849. In the United States, the technology did not reach a stage. Public works were not developed enough until the mid-1870s that would even allow a multi-user bathroom. Before then, you have basically separate single-user privies, outhouses, whatever. Once in a while, you would find that there would be two of these privies next to each other, one labeled men, one labeled women, but often that would be a single privy used by both sexes, but what is important is they were all single user. So the modern tension over bathrooms only arises because of the possibility of a multi-user bathroom. And in the United States, that did not happen until roughly the 1870s.
Absolutely fascinating. And this is really, really important to keep in mind when we talk about and evaluate arguments made around what bathroom laws should be today. It's really important to have an understanding of how things actually were previously in human society. We've been speaking to Terry Kogan, professor of law at the S.J. Quinney College of Law at the University of Utah. So great to talk to you. I really appreciate it.
David, it was good talking to you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Hillary Clinton has surged to a 15-point lead over Donald Trump in a recent poll by Mcclatchy Marist, 48-33, and leads in all 16 of the most recent polls. Let's take a look at this. And it is all blue, Lewis. Everything from the recent ABC News Washington Post poll all the way down the page, 16 polls back to the Economist YouGov poll of a little over a week ago. It is blue. Hillary Clinton up from as little as 1 point all the way up to 15 points, as I mentioned in that recent Mcclatchy Marist poll. Also, if you include the four-way polling, not everybody does four-way polling, so we have fewer polls to look at. We have that data to show you. Hillary Clinton up in the recent 10 four-way polls, which include Libertarian Gary Johnson and Green Party candidate Jill Stein. And the best part about this is Donald Trump is no doubt not nearly done saying insane and ignorant things. I can't wait for the national debates personally. The Mcclatchy poll confirms similar numbers to what we've been looking at in other polls as far as Bernie supporters. Last month, 83% of Bernie supporters were going to vote for Hillary Clinton in November, self-reported. That number has increased to 90% this month in that same poll. And Donald Trump is also hurting. In the same poll last month, 85% of Republicans were supporting Trump. That number is now down to 79%. Let's look now at electoral-vote.com's prediction based on state-by-state polling. Yikes. This is getting really, really bad for Donald Trump. According to electoral-vote.com, Hillary Clinton currently expecting 319 electoral votes on November 8th, needing only 270 to be the next president of the United States. Trump at 185. Currently, electoral-vote.com has only Ohio and Georgia as states that are currently tied. Even giving every single one of those electoral votes to Donald Trump, he would be nowhere close to where he needs to be president of the United States. And by the way, Georgia tied. If Georgia really is in play, Lewis, Trump is done. And I know it's important not to get ahead of ourselves. This is just where the polling stands today. If this is even remotely accurate, this is an insane, historic situation we are facing ourselves with.
This is just the result of Donald Trump not being able to shut up. He just says stupid thing after stupid thing, and it's destroying him. Why can't he just shut up?
Destroying him and many down ballot Republicans as well. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's early August. We will talk to Bill Scher about what all of this means a little bit later in the week. Hey, listen to this. Donald Trump is the candidate on illegal immigration, right? He has said countless times that it is only because of him that anybody in the Republican Party and now the presidential race is talking about illegal immigration. He's going to build the wall. He's going to make Mexico pay for it. He's going to ban Muslims from countries with ties to terrorism from coming to the U.S. until we can, quote, figure out what the hell is going on, because he won't tolerate or abet illegal immigration. However, that's obviously nonsense. The Muslim ban would be unconstitutional. The wall would be outrageously expensive and not even that useful, and there is no way that Mexico is paying for it. It is widely known that Trump himself has worked with contractors in the buildings that he builds that employ undocumented immigrants. We knew all that, but now, this is amazing. It is increasingly apparent that Donald Trump's wife, Melania Trump, has not been completely upfront in the story of her immigration to the United States from her birth country of Slovenia. Can you imagine if the anti-illegal immigration candidate is married to a woman who was working in the United States illegally? It appears that that is the case. Let's talk it through. Melania Trump has long claimed that she first came to the U.S. in '96 and that she followed the rules. Here is a quote from what she said to Bazaar earlier this year. "You follow the rules. You follow the law. Every few months, you need to fly back to Europe and stamp your visa. After a few visas, I applied for a green card and got it in 2001. Pretty innocuous, right? Well, not really. Politico noticed that the nude photos of her that were recently reprinted on the cover of the New York Post are from 1995 and appear to have been taken in the United States. Both facts, neither of which has been refuted. Why does this matter? Well, Melania Trump, in describing reapplying for her visa by leaving the country and coming back every few months, is implying that you are not on an H-1B working visa, because an H-1B working visa lasts 3 years and can be renewed within the United States. You don't have to leave to reapply to renew your H-1B working visa. That's the visa that would allow her to work in the United States. What Melania Trump has described, this leaving, reapplying, and coming back, would be if she had a B1 temporary business visitor visa or a B2 tourist visa. What's important about those visas, Lewis? Neither allow the visa holder to work in the U.S. If Melania Trump worked in the United States while in the country on either the business visitor, or tourist visa, that means that she was illegally working in the U.S., effectively an illegal immigrant. Now, she responded by saying the following. This is from Twitter. "In recent days, there has been a lot of inaccurate reporting and misinformation concerning my immigration status as far back as 1996. Back in 1996. Let me set the record straight. I have at all times been in full compliance with the immigration laws of this country, period. Any allegation to the contrary is untrue. In July of 2006, I proudly became a U.S. citizen. Over the past 20 years, I have been fortunate to live, work, and raise a family in this great nation, and I share my husband's love for our country." Unfortunately, this is not an explanation, Lewis, of why she would be leaving the country, reapplying, and coming back while working in the U.S., because that would mean she was working without authorization. That is an action of illegal immigration status, period. And she still has not explained that.
Well, it doesn't really matter if you are working illegally or here illegally if you're an attractive Slovenian woman. It only matters if you're Mexican or Muslim.
So there has been more to the story. An immigration attorney who worked for the Trump organization told Univision that Melania Trump obtained a green card based on marriage in 2001. There is one potential problem with that. That was 4 years before she married Donald Trump. Well, maybe she was married to somebody else in the United States, right? That would explain it. Well, she told Larry King in 2005 she was never married before meeting Donald Trump. Not to mention, this entire conversation is about 2001 forward, and the time in question is 1995 and 1996. If Donald Trump wanted President Obama's birth certificate, way more documentation is in order here, because we have some actual questions about the immigration status of Donald Trump's wife. Donald Trump, of course, the anti-illegal immigration candidate.
Yeah. Well, Donald Trump is already doing a great job destroying himself. This probably won't add too much fuel to the fire.
The Democratic coalition against Trump has filed a Freedom of Information Act request for some of these documents. We will see what we find out. All right, let's go to a voicemail. 219-2-DAVID-P is the voicemail number. Quick reminder, the new website is up and running, brand new davidpakman.com. If you want a 50% discount on your membership to help us test the new membership system, the coupon code is BETA50, BETA50. It is a 50% discount only for the first 25 people. After 25 people use that code, the coupon expires. Check it out. Let's go now to voicemail. Last week, we had this voicemail, Louis, from Ramon Ramos, who was clearly just Troy York using a different name and a slightly altered voice. Troy York left a voicemail saying that wasn't him, but he happens to really agree with Ramon Ramos. Take a listen to this.
David Pakman, this is Troy York. Can you have a show about how transnationalists like yourself are abusing and using the economy? That's why you have all these high-end restaurants in urban neighborhoods, and all the rural areas have gas stations and Acon Marts and dollar stores. And I heard your message. That was not me. I don't know who Raymond Ramos is, but that was not me that called the other day. But I agree with everything he says.
Right.
That there is conspiracy that only Americans live in rural and small town. Main Street and the Wall Street, Hollywood connection is by these transnationalists from Argentina and Europe and the Middle East, who come and open all these restaurants and put this economy to shame, using two governments to outsource all the revenue.
Okay, yeah, let's stop it there. So, okay, Ramon Ramos and Troy York share the same voice. It wasn't the same person, but by the way, both have what is not a widely held view that there is a conspiracy to put the nice restaurants in urban areas and gas stations in rural areas, which of course makes perfect sense. You put the restaurants where there are lots of people. You put the gas stations where you need cars to get around. Amazing, Louis, that someone with the exact same voice called in and had these very, very unique and sort of niche concerns. Very, very coincidental, isn't it?
Maybe they were separated at birth, brothers. Just a theory.
On the bonus show today, we will tell you about the entire Russian Paralympic team being banned. Okay, just the entire team has been banned. Also, another instance of significant paranoia on American airline flights. And a noodle stall has received a Michelin star. I saw an interesting little documentary about this. We will talk about all of those stories and more. DavidPakman.com/membership to sign up instantly on the brand new DavidPakman.com website. And of course, Beta 50, BETA 50. For the first 25 people who type in that coupon code on the new website, you will get a 50% discount on your membership.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.